Shall we continue, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
Sure. I'm Bill Waste. Been a member of the Lyme community for 35 years. And I'm going to quickly introduce people who are here as part of the presentation team. That starts with myself. Basically, my relationship to the Pinnacle project is as an interested party. I am not a member of the Pinnacle group. I've done some work associated with Loch Lyme Lodge, but I have not done any work in any kind of a professional capacity for the Pinnacle project. But Kathy and I have been keeping close tabs on the project concept, its vision, and what's going on as we reach a stage in our lives where we may be thinking of doing something other than the house we built 30 years ago, and are looking at this as a very strong possible alternative. So that's my relationship with the project. And I just came down because most of you who know me know how reluctant I am to stand up in front of people and say anything, as to be someone who could help get us off the ground. So having said that, let me introduce other members of the team, of the people who are here. First, the two members of the Pinnacle group, if that's the proper name for them, are Liz Ryan Cole and Rich Brown, who you have seen if you have been to any of the meetings that they've been to, and they've been to a lot over the last few years. Professionals who are with us tonight and have been lending their expertise in the design and the advanced work on the project so that there could be something to present are, I'll start in the back, Michael Bruss of Brush Construction, who has been providing advanced understanding and planning of what may work and what might work. And people can speak a little bit more to their background and relationship with Pinnacle as they take a portion of tonight. Stuart is right beside him. Stuart White is architect and has been the primary architect on the design of the buildings of the project and concept so far. Brian Pratt is right here in front, and he is from CLD Consulting, and his area of focus and expertise has been particularly on the site itself and aspects of that. And then finally, Bobby Hance, who is of Sheehan, Finney, Bass, and Green. That's why I have the cards in front of me so I can get all the partners' names right. The attorney at law and specializing in the area of housing and group housing and that type of stuff. Okay, so those are the people involved, and basically.
And if I'm going to do my legal thing.
Yep.
Just to start, and I know this board is very experienced and understands its role in tonight's matter. We were before the planning board a couple of weeks ago on a non-binding preliminary review. We received the minutes from that planning board meeting recently, and they were a bit surprising coming out of a non-binding review, potentially exceeding sort of the scope of what we understood that review to be, and presenting a pretty legalistic opposition to the variance that you're here to hear tonight. So assuming those minutes are available to this board, but also assuming that this board knows that it reviews decisions of the planning board for legality and can make its own decisions, I just need to do the legal check. If anybody can't be unbiased and not prejudiced about this application, then I'm going to have to ask for your consideration and recusal from this meeting. So we have that concern. It's my obligation to put it on the table. And if any member, in light of the planning board's very specific and, like I said, perhaps excessive report under these circumstances, then we have to ask those members to recuse themselves.
I'll speak as a member. I haven't seen it. So, have you seen the planning
minutes.
board minute?
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
I have it in neutral.
Thank you.
And other members?
I have not seen them at this point. I
Well,
don't know if they were in the package.
Yes, they were.
They were, okay. I just kind of
Yes,
skipped over that. I was looking at the beef of the project. Not extraneous noise.
Can you speak up, please?
Sorry, I was unaware that I had the minutes and skipped right over them as being not pertinent to what I was looking at in the proposed project. We will take that under advisement eventually, but I haven't always been a fan of the planning board anyway, so.
Okay.
I will tell you that I have read them, and I believe I can be impartial in making fair and making decisions.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And I'm an alternate not appointed for this hearing.
Thank you.
Though
I
it is
guess
our
we all
custom for alternates to sit with the board and to contribute, but not to vote.
Thank you.
Do you wanna break?
Yeah.
Curtis is here, do you wanna break, just it?
I think it'd be perfect before starting into this.
Yeah, that would be
We've
excellent.
laid the
Let's do
groundwork,
that.
it's the perfect
Come on
time to
up.
do that.
Make sure that everyone gets a voice. Do you wish
To that point, we can do we have the written materials, we can do a brief presentation, a little bit briefer to allow people who are here to comment tonight,
Yes.
knowing that we can continue
Yes, what I'd like
and
to
answer
do
questions
is
later, but
make
we'll
your
keep it brief.
presentation,
Yeah,
get public comment,
yeah,
and then move on to the more substantive issues.
great,
And if that's acceptable to you all, that would be a very good way to proceed.
Perfect.
absolutely.
Thank you, and let's
Rich,
move
you wanna
forward to your presentation.
warm her back up?
While he's doing that, is everyone signed in? Okay. Darren, I'll give that to you, the minutes. Thank you.
As we're waiting for basically what we're looking to do is, first of all, not read to you the materials presented to you, but to point out the materials of substance. To use the slide presentation just as an outline in trying to make the points and presentation of the information regarding the project. And then, as Bobby said, hopefully look to get people's comments, begin the process of answering questions, identifying things like that. You didn't like it?
No, it's unplugged.
I did.
Ah,
Okay.
Ah.
You're rebooting? Okay.
that plug comes out very
Here
easily.
it is.
Okay, so,
Before, as we go into this, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to speak from a personal perspective. I believe I'm pretty well grounded in Lyme. As I said, we've lived here for 35 years, built our house ourselves, quite literally pounding the nails and hoisting the beams 30 years ago. I raised our 2 kids and are now reaching at a stage in life where they are off ending college lives of their own, and we are looking to see what the next phase of life might be. And one of the questions for us is, how long will we stay in the house that we built? We are not unique in looking to a stage in life in which our income may not be as it was, but that doesn't cause our property taxes to go down. So we have begun the process of looking around to see, are there alternatives? And one of them is sell our house and move someplace that we can afford. We're not sure that that's possible in line with the way things are in terms of the housing in the market as it is today. So it's why we've had an interest in what the vision has been on the part of the people who bought the Lockline property, how many years ago?
almost.
10 years, almost 10 years ago now, as to providing some possible alternatives. I would just ask the board, as you take a look at the presentation this evening, as you look through the materials, to do, in effect, what I know you will, which is to look at this with open eyes and with an open mind. This is very different. There's no getting around the fact that it's been a long time, if ever, that a project of this scope has come before the boards in Lyme. Certainly in the time in which the zoning ordinances existed. One of the things that I've noticed over that period of time is the changes in the economic realities since the ordinances were primarily put in place, have put continuing pressure on property owners in town And in many cases, there isn't a relief for some of that pressure in town. The zoning ordinances, as I know from their initial design, had a restrictive element to them. And rightly so. If you're gonna put in ordinances, it's so that you don't have unregulated, uncontrolled growth. But I think that there are some different alternatives and ways at looking at things beyond just what you see most commonly here, which is the development of standalone, individual, single-family homes of multiple bedrooms on sizable lots, spread across town. This is not a project like that. I, again, think that there are elements to this that are unique in the way in which it preserves open land. The construction methods that are being looked at and being used in developing energy efficiency, low carbon footprint, down to really the social compact of the people who are looking to live there, to share a vision of living gently on the land, as it were. Providing a variety of housing elements that really don't exist in town now, such as one-bedroom properties, such as shared space, so that individuals' own square footage doesn't have to be as large, and all of those elements. These are different concepts than what we've typically done in the last 15 to 30 years in Lyme. And it's opened my eyes to some different scenarios that I think are necessary for us to remain a diverse and vibrant town going into the future. And I would just hope that you will, with open eyes and open minds, take a look at this as a variation of what's standard, but what has some very significant multiple positive elements to it, both in land use and in structure. And that's just coming as I said, a concerned Lyme citizen who's put a lot of time and effort in trying to learn and understand what this vision is and what the project is. So with that, let's take a look at some of the details. The Pinnacle project, Liz, time to turn it over to you.
Okay. So your book has a table of contents. Hi, I'm Liz. And we're going to go through that briefly. And I'm the person who's going to do the narrative. And there's 3 pages of narrative. I'm not going to make you listen to all of it. But what are we trying to build? We're trying to build 36 units of clustered, environmentally sensitive housing on 4 of the 98 acres that we have there. What are we asking for? We're not asking for a change of the zoning ordinance. We're asking for variance. And that's a big difference. People have asked us, why are you coming back to the town? And the answer is we're coming back with a different request. We heard what people said about changing the zoning ordinance, so we came back saying, let's ask for variance. By clustering and by having a smaller footprint, we can have a smaller impact. This addresses people who are concerned about the environment. This works for young people who can't afford to build a big house. This works for people who want to raise kids. It's terrific for single parents especially. And it works for older people, as Bill talked about, as we think about where we're going to move next. Are we going to downsize? How are we going to downsize? It's not cheap to build, as well you know. And we are working very hard to have environmentally, really smart environmental buildings, and our engineers and architect and project chief will tell you about that. But that's something that's very important in this project. When I started working on this 10 years ago, I knew very little about land use. Since then, I've joined the Thetford Planning Commission, and we've written our master plan. So I have a very different appreciation and a deeper appreciation of the work of, New Hampshire does it differently, but of the planning board and the ZBA. So I looked at the Lyme master plan as I was write up some words here, and I close the narrative with a quote from the Lyme Master Plan. I believe that this project is exactly what Lyme is looking for in terms of mixed housing types, environmental conservation, access to recreation, and protection of open land. So, with that, what does our next slide tell us? Tell me where we're gonna go. Rich, do you wanna give
Yeah,
the
why don't I
overview
take a
of that? Okay.
My name is Rich Brown. I live in Lyme, just at 84 Orford Road. I wanted to take a couple minutes and just show you what we're talking about here.
Can people see that? No, hard from here.
It's pretty hard to see. We do have a blow up.
One of them, if you just turn the light off,
If you want to turn-
if that'll work.
Whoa.
How's that?
Okay.
If that's acceptable to people, that would be fine for now.
You could do that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do this.
Oh,
Oh,
excellent.
that's high tech stuff.
We'll need a light to see the on button.
So, what we're looking at here is, this is, of course, Post Pond. This is Route 10 that runs along Post Pond. You all know where the lodge is. In fact, right there is where the lodge building is. We own 121 acres. Lutland Lodging owns 121 acres. There are 110 acres here on this side of the road. There's 11 acres on this side. You may know that we have subdivided off 12 acres of land specifically for use for the hospitality business. We call it our lodging lot. The remaining 98 acres here is available, and that's where we plan to do the co-housing. In fact, it's hard to see in this picture. It's a little easier to see on the blow-ups, or you can go to our website too and see. Our plan is to develop on 4 acres here, at the southeast corner of the lot. This is a blow-up that's a little bit easier to see. Here again is Route 10. This is the beach over by Post Pond. The lodge building is right in here. And we would build up behind the tennis court, on the far side of the tennis court, away from the road, a set of buildings here, a total of 36 units. I think that's the two.
This is for student, that people should look at it.
All right.
And maybe we should turn one light.
Sure, possibly, yes. So if you want the
I recognize Steve by his voice.
So, my name is Stuart White. I'm an architect. I've been around here for quite a while. I remember when Camp Pinnacle had a bridge over the road. I was a founding partner of Banwell White. He won some of the buildings you might be familiar with, that are mine, the Dartmouth Boathouse, the Dartmouth Skiway, David Gallery, and Green Woodlands, up in the woods up here. There were really two things that attracted me to this project from the get-go. And first was energy conservation, which I've devoted the better part of my career to. All of the co-housing, generally the co-housing movement seems to be very concerned about being very low energy consuming projects. Some are net zero or carbon neutral. Those are goals of ours. And the other is a really exemplary land use, the chance to be able to participate in a project like this. And the two go hand in hand, because a lot of time cluster developments have clustered houses. In this case, we actually have a lot of interconnected units. So they share party walls, which increases the energy conservation element, and also preserves more land, more open space. So what you're looking at in the slide in the upper left, you know there are a bunch of cabins, which are much loved in the community, and I spotted those on my first visit up there about 8 years ago. And we sort of took our design cues from that and from just a general sense of rustic buildings in the area. Some people might call this Adirondack, whatever, but we're trying to fit into the landscape. We have a rugged terrain, a rolling terrain, and we're trying to work within that and provide views and sun, and so that's about all I have to say. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I think you're,
So Brian, you gonna use light?
No, I'm good. My name is Brian Pratt. I'm with CLD Consulting Engineers. I'm the civil engineer on the project, so I'll be handling all the civil engineering, the grading, utilities, building placement, parking lot, all the utility designs, the septic system, and water system will be coordinating with a water system engineer, because that's a pretty specific. But what I want to do is I want to go through the actual site plan and just kind of show you what we came up with. This is kind of a blow up, a little bit more of that overview, and then the close up. This is more of a preliminary engineering plan, where that was more of a kind of a you know, a rendering.
Show and tell.
Yeah, exactly. So what I have here is, like I said, it's a preliminary engineering plan. The tennis court is located right here. The existing lodge is over in this area. The new barn location, which we recently got approved but have not moved yet, is right here. This is the existing driveway off of Route 10. And so what the plan is to connect using the existing driveway. We've coordinated with DOT about it already. We're gonna have to get a new DOT driveway permit for the expansion of traffic. But so the main driveway comes in, kind of skirts around. There's the recreational building is located right here. So we'd skirt around that, try to protect that, come in, starts to pick up some grade as it gets up to the tennis court, kind of levels off up in this area. So what we have is multiple buildings. I'll start right in the middle here. This is the common house, and I think if I, there we go, zoomed in a little bit. And these match the handouts that were passed out, but it's easier to look at these at the moment. So like they mentioned, the co-housing, a big thing with that is the shared facilities. So this building right here in the middle is the common house, and this is where they'll have common dining facilities, recreational facilities, and other amenities that will go along with the co-housing. Next to that is a building called Crest, and this building has, I believe that one has 7 units. Building down here is called Vale. There will be 11 units in that. And then these other buildings are either quads or quints, so they either have 4 units or 5 units. They're the same footprint, they're just the 5 units have a penthouse apartment up at the top. The units are split. Some of them are 4 bedrooms, some of them are 5 bedrooms. Some of them are, some of them are 4 bedrooms. Some of them are 4 bedrooms, some of them are 3, some of them are 2, and then there's some single bedroom units as well. Each unit will have 1 covered parking space. So under this building in Crest, there'll be some drive-under garages. So each unit in this building has their own garage under the building. For the 11 units here, they're split between 2 sections of carports. Each of the quad or the quint units will have a little carport or garage right in front of it on this side. Up here, they have under parking. Over here, this will be a standalone carport for a couple of them, and there'll be a couple of under parking spaces there. The reason for that is, as Stu mentioned, is rolling terrain. So what we did is we tried to fit this into the terrain as best as possible to avoid blasting, avoid erosion, sediment. So it kind of fits in with the terrain as best as possible. As far as utilities, I'll go back here. For septic, we plan to install 1 large septic system up here. We've done some test pits up there, and I know that we can fit that in up there. We'll have a small pump station, which all the sewer will be gravity flow to this point and pump up to that septic system. A well, we're still working on a proposed placement for that. That'll be somewhere probably up in this area, up behind the development. As far as permits, this would require a alteration or train permit from DES, a water supply permit. We have a small wetland impact up in the front, up by the main driveway. It's only about 500 to 700 square feet, and the reason for that is to avoid having to tear down that existing cabin. So, as part of this, as you know, this use isn't exactly allowed in town. But we do have a method to navigate the ordinance, and that's the reason that we're here, is to present to you the variances and special exceptions that would be needed to execute this plan. So, what I have up on the screen is a conceptual, conventional subdivision plan. The ordinance has a section for, it's called lot size averaging, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And what this plan shows is what could be subdivided into a conventional subdivision if we wanted to use all the regular town ordinances with road length, lot size, frontage, geometry, depth to width ratio. And basically, each of these lots does take into account the conservation district overlays. The pink in the back is the steep slopes. The light blue is the 100-foot wetland buffer. The dark blue is the actual wetlands themselves. And then the yellow and the orangey kind of colors are the agricultural soils. So what I did is, we did this concept, and we took into account the reductions required for each of these lots, which is 80% for the wetland buffers, 80% for the steep slopes, 100% removal for the wetlands themselves, and either 40 or 60% removal for the agricultural soils. So it ended up turning the 3 or 5 acre zoning into about 20 acres per lot. So each of these lots are about 20 acres. So I'll walk. Sorry.
Sure. What is the purpose of that dashed line box?
This one up here is a septic easement for the lodge lot. That's the lodge right now. Each of the units kind of has their own. Many of them have their own little septic.
That's what I remember.
Yep. So what we did is we do have an approved septic that they're probably going to be constructing in the spring. We did have some minor amendments to that, so we will be resubmitting to DES with the minor changes to that plan. But that's a septic easement.
Okay.
So basically, with this plan, this shows that we could get 5 lots with a conventional subdivision. There's a section in the lot size averaging that says you're allowed to cluster those. And if you preserve 75% of the lot, you're allowed to get a density bonus up to 25%. So with these 5 lots, if we clustered them all down into this area, preserve everything in the back, as long as it's 75% or more, that gives us 6 lots. There's another section of the ordinance that says that you can convert a single building into up to 6 units each. So if we were to cluster these and build 6 very large single-family homes, we could then convert them into 6 units if we waited the 5 years. So that 5 lots with the 6th density bonus creates 6 large homes. We convert those into 36 multifamily units. So that's where we got the 36 units. It's not, it does have some actual science behind it and some bearing in the zoning ordinance. So in order to actually accomplish this, obviously we need to get some variances and some special exceptions. So we have 2 options to navigate the ordinance. The first option is pretty much the most straightforward. It's to just ask this board for a variance to allow the 36 units in this configuration that we have it. We'd also need a variance to, sure.
When you said in this configuration, you're referring to this?
Sorry, this configuration.
Thank you.
So that would be one option. Along with that variance request, there would be another variance that, with the 26,000 square feet of lot coverage per lot, obviously this exceeds the 26,000, so we need to have a variance to exceed that. And I do have those numbers if I can pull those up if anyone's interested. The other thing that I didn't really go into is the common house here. Ideally, this common house would be connected to the two larger buildings, the ones with the 11 units and the 7 units. So what this plan shows is there is an elevated bridge connecting both of these, structurally independent, but one of the questions that we're not really sure of is the max building footprint of 7,000 square feet. If these are considered one building because of these bridges, we may need another variance to exceed the 7,000, but each building as it stands alone is less than 7,000 square feet. With any route that we do take, we would need some special exceptions. One is the development on agricultural soils. Another is disturbance of the wetlands and wetland buffers. Another is height regulations. The ordinance requires buildings be 35 feet or less. You can get a special exception to that, provided you coordinate with the fire chief. So we did try to initiate coordination with the fire chief, but we were told that we were supposed to wait until after we met with you. So if we have your blessing, and after this, we'll start coordinating with the fire chief to go over this. Most of the buildings will be 33 feet tall, but because of the rolling terrain, like this end of Vale will be over 35 feet because it's kind of built into the slope. So I think, what is it, up to 40 or 45 at one point?
I believe it's
40 or so. And like I said, that's basically because these are kind of walkouts. Same thing this end of the common house. It'll be, on that end, it'll be greater than 35, but on the other end, it'll be higher.
And one of the questions that we need to work on with Mike Hensley is how the averaging effect comes into play when you're looking at the totality of the building because of the varying grades from one end of the building to the other. Some of the questions we have for you.
Yeah, and we're willing to provide we're definitely willing to work with him to provide some assurance that it won't adversely affect his ability if there is a fire. We do plan to sprinkler all these buildings. We have a cistern planned up in this area, so each of these will have sprinklers. We are willing to provide additional fire paths around the building so that the fire truck can access the rear of the building, which would be easier to get to maybe than some of the other areas. So if that option doesn't work, basically the simplest option, like I said, just request the variance to allow the use, is there's a second option, which is to basically just eliminate the 5-year waiting period from the conversion. So what that would be is we would go to the planning board, get their lot, we'd have to get the lot size averaging approved from them, build 5 single-family homes, and if we had a variance from the 5-year waiting period, we could immediately convert them into the multiple units. Along with that, that brings up the problem with the 6 units per building. This building has 11, this building has 7. These buildings have either 4 or 5, so overall, the average of the buildings each only have 6 units, so that would be another variance request. And then basically the same special exceptions would apply for the second option as well, which would be the development of agricultural soils, disturbance of wetland and wetland buffers, the height regulations, and then we'd need an additional special exception to exceed the 26,000 square feet of lot coverage. The lot size averaging regulations do allow you to exceed the 26,000 square feet in a lot size average clustered subdivision, as long as that total land disturbance is not greater than what you would have gotten on each lot, which we are under. Basically, that would allow us, I think, 140,000 square feet of disturbance, and we're less than that. The other request that we have with this board is to review the plan and see if there are any, any of the special requests or variance requests that we are requesting are not correct, or if you think that there's a different section of the ordinance that we should be asking, or if there are any special exceptions or variances that you think we just missed that you think should be relevant. I think that's done with my section. Is it?
Light on?
Light on. A little bit of light on.
Or you go to section.
Right? Well, just one.
That's good. That's the good one.
That was the good one.
Oh,
No.
That's
wait,
two,
yeah.
down one.
Oh, wait, we want some lights off for this.
You want lights
Yeah.
off for this?
We want lights off for this.
Tommy? Or Rich is gonna do this?
So we're gonna do this?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take the picture.
So, yes, right. So, one of the questions that people have asked, what's this gonna look like? And so, let me tell you what we've done, the work we've done to see. I actually took the photograph you see there. It was over at the northeast corner of the lake, lovely cross-country skiing out there, and I took that panorama. This is the view of the east shore. This is 84 Orford Road. There's some cabins here. This is the barn for Lockline Lodge, and this is the main lodge building. Actually, let me do a little truth in advertising here. In fact, the view today is that the barn is directly behind the lodge building. In a separate action, we've received permission to move the barn out of the wetland and preserve it by moving it a little bit, about 120 feet east of where it is now. So this is the barn shown where it will be in the future. Yeah,
Photoshop is like one day.
Photoshop is wonderful. This cluster here is the roof lines of the development as you would see it from the lake, from across the lake. The way we produced this was we had Bob White's engineering staff produce a SketchUp model. I don't know how many people are familiar with SketchUp, but it's a computer modeling program, architectural modeling program that will let you construct a model of the buildings and then let you rotate it and view it from most any angle. And so what we did was to say, give us the view from across the pond of these buildings, and then we used Photoshop to overlay the two. So this is our best belief of what the buildings would look like. So that it's I think it's a relatively low impact view. We have another picture. This is a blow up of the same thing. This is the barn in the new location. This is the main lodge building. And this is what you would see. This is zoomed in to see what's there. Another view. Well, what about from the road? This is a picture taken standing in front of the Lockline Lodge on the opposite side of the road. Here's the sign that we're all familiar with. This land up here is the tennis court, and behind it you can see the first quad, which is closest to the road. This building back here is the Vale, the long building that has the 11 units in it. And so, I will concede that you will be able to see it from the road, but it's hardly looming. It's hardly a major impact. In fact, one of the things that I want to do is kind of go back. The Pinnacle Hill goes up a great deal farther. I don't know. It's sort of there.
Very close to the top of the slide.
Yeah, okay. And so this does not loom. This is not, the fear is this is going to be enormous, but the fact is it's not going to be nearly as big as we originally thought. So.
Got it.
Tell us if you want any light.
Yeah, a little bit of light would be good.
Well, the logo.
That's
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's it.
No,
And we have, this will turn here, notebook.
Okay.
We did some calculations, and maybe Rich,
Sure.
you want to speak to those
I
too?
can speak to those as well, yes.
Yeah.
Is this the
That's not the notebook. Dave's got them.
Okay, right. So one of the things that we did was to go through and come up with a good sense of how many people are gonna be, in this development. We have 36 units. We made a table, we made a table of the number of each kind of unit, 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom large and small, and 1-bedroom. Came up with an estimate of the number of adults.
Yeah, there's some page numbers, not tabs, but this would be number 3.
Right.
Yeah.
In your book, that's number 3.
They're
And
not,
so,
unfortunately, they're not numbered.
They're not, no, it's not
No,
page
the
numbers,
page
it's a,
numbers,
yeah, it's
yeah,
a
I'm sorry.
divider number, right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
and so we then estimated how many adults in each of those size units. 2 adults in the 3 or the 4-bedroom, 1.5 adults in the 2 bedrooms, large or small, and then one adult in the 1-bedroom. Multiply that out and we come up to 59 adults. As far as children is concerned, actually, I think everybody's concern is how many students are there going to be, and so this is what we calculated. Roger Hawk from Hawk Consulting did some work for us about 2 years ago on the number of children that come from varying building types. And so I did 2 calculations. One is, what's the maximum that could be there? And for example, a 4-bedroom private home, detached private home, has 0.99 students per dwelling unit. So about 1 kid in school for each building. The Lyme average is about 0.41 student for each dwelling unit. I can give you a lot of detail on this if you want to know, but I'll just skim over it. And we said that for the small 2-bedroom and the 1-bedroom, there'd be 0.09, which is the New Hampshire number for smaller units. That leads us to 12.4 students for all of the 36 units. I did a more conservative, I think more realistic calculation using the numbers that planners use, where it's about 1/3 of a child per unit for the bigger units, and then and then 0.09 for the smaller units. That comes to just 9 students for the development. So that's where we get 9 to 13 students. Add that up to come up to 68 to 72 people in this community.
And in connection with that, before we move on to the phasing, I have some data, some studies that aren't in your book, but I can provide you that talks about the fiscal impact of this sort of development, mixed housing, mixed income level housing. And the results of this data has to do with the concern of most municipalities is net negative impact in terms of tax revenues versus tax expenditures. And what the studies, one out of UMass and another one, I think it's Purdue, talks about how that's becoming an older, ancient concept. In fact, school costs are disassociating from number of students, has more to do with construction costs and other economic impacts, which is kind of interesting. And in fact, clustered multi-housing, more dense developments have a more positive impact on municipal revenues than your spread out single lot developments that require more road work and more services spread out over a larger area. So I have those studies and I can provide them because we are sensitive to the concerns of the community that a project such as this, A, might be a tax drain. We don't believe this one would be. B, would be a burden on services, and for a number of reasons having to do with the co-housing model and the location of this property. It's uniquely a mile from the center of town. It's on a state road, which is obviously maintained by the state, it has private roads, it has private utilities. Its burden on town services is much less. You also have the community aspect where you have people here supporting their own neighbors in communities. So in terms of transportation burdens, they're much reduced because of this co-housing model. We do have, and I'm going to introduce Michael Bruss, who's another one of our consultants. He has been involved with co-housing development in New Hampshire and in New England. And just a brief word about.
Very brief. Michael Bruss, Project Management. I with Stu did the Green Woodlands project, and I've done projects throughout the Upper Valley. I did I built one co-housing project, a 30-unit project in Peterborough, New Hampshire, that's been quite successful. And I've consulted on several others. And as Bobby said, the model with co-housing is people are coming together in an intentional community. They support one another. Aging in place is a very big component of that, along with promoting diversity and those sorts of things. And additionally, as Stu said, the objective with this project is to lay very light on the land, very high-performing buildings, net zero or net zero ready, which is carbon neutral, and that's what we're building the model on. Thank you.
And to that point, this project isn't something that springs up overnight. So while it needs some economy of development in terms of approval, so that things like infrastructure can be funded and then installed so that the units can start to be constructed, it is fully anticipated that it's a phased project. So you have a number of units and the common house, which is sort of the anchor for the community activities, and then additional units in buildings as the project moves forward. So it would be phased in, and it would have a gradual build out. There is a workforce housing component to this application. In doing the development costs and of course holding land and infrastructure development and regulatory costs and approval costs, getting through this process all adds cost to the land. However, in preliminary financial models, there are units in this development that fall within the workforce housing categories for Grafton County, and it is the goal of the group to focus and maintain that and subsidize those units to keep up to 10%, which would be roughly 4 of the 36 units, available as workforce housing. Statute requires a method of ensuring that that continues long term. People can't just come into workforce housing and flip them out at a profit. So there would be a way through the Pinnacle LLC to establish that nonprofit oversight, possibly through a co-housing organization, to maintain the workforce housing portion. The workforce housing, though, does need to be subsidized by the units. So the 36 unit number is also, it's not only supported by following the ordinance to where we could get in a cumbersome way through the existing ordinance, very consistent with the, we could build 6 large houses, which would be not clustered, scarred up the hillside. We could do 5 that way. Each of those 5 could have a accessory dwelling unit, that's 10. If we clustered them 6, that's 12. We could get to a number of units, and through what Brian was describing, the 6 lot size averaging, if it were approved, and then converted after 5 years, we'd be at 36. So we feel like we're consistent with what the ordinance would allow in a really bulky way, or we do it in a well-planned way. The 36 also financially supports 4 workforce housing units. Without that number, we don't get the workforce housing piece of it. So if it were a smaller number, those would have to go by the wayside. In your notebook, sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
I'll just jump in yours. And we have the workforce sales numbers, figures in your notebook at page, sort of divider number 5. We have a letter in divider number 6 from Coldwell Banker Realtors addressing the impact on abutting properties. And their opinion is based on their years of experience and their familiarity with single-family residences next to multifamily developments, that there would be no, and particularly this development, the way it's designed, there would be no adverse impact to abutting properties from this development. We also have a letter from a co-housing organization with experience in co-housing development, and again, their conclusion is there would be no negative impact on abutting properties. At the divider 7, we've got a co-housing brochure, just a little more information about what the co-housing focus is. So yes,
You have something after that page, yes? No?
after which page?
Co-housing, about
Oh,
co-housing?
you don't have the color brochure?
Ah, okay.
No,
All right.
that's not it.
No wonder we had extras.
Yeah, no wonder we had extras.
I think it's coming.
Here's one.
He may.
Here we go.
Anybody who doesn't have one?
No, we got-
Looks like this, this is the
It's
brochure.
easy to pick up. Yeah.
One that is it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's in
Some
here.
notes on
Hang on.
Steve.
Yeah, here's an extra one. Yes, yeah.
Alan needs one,
Okay.
Think
Yeah.
it's hard to reach?
Actually, you know, I didn't have it. Now that I have this, I'm all set.
Everybody
you.
else?
It's in-
And if anybody from,
Yeah,
How much longer will your part of the presentation
I'm gonna
be?
just jump about 2 minutes.
Okay, because I'd like to begin to
Yes.
get public comment on this so that we can.
I will skip over the 5 criteria because they're in the writing, and I'll do
Yeah.
them later
Yes.
when you want.
We will be coming back to many points.
Absolutely. So the other thing that's just of interest, other possible ways this property could be developed. Brian went through the 5 conventional lots. You get big lots, big houses, lots of scarring, lots of road work. We tried to avoid that. We also took a look at, there's a part of the ordinance when we're looking at the affordable component. You've got a nice piece of your ordinance that talks about relaxing restrictions to get increased density to allow affordability. 4 units on 2 acres, roughly ½ acre per unit. If we subdivided this into as many of those lots as possible, we're looking at 10 or so 4 houses per lot, so, you know, per effective 2 acre lot, and you're looking at 40-some affordable units. That's not what the Pinnacle Group's looking for, but that's a density target that could be achieved through the affordable housing piece of the ordinance. So again, we feel we're consistent with what's already allowed in this area. And then, since we're going to the legal authority for the variance piece, that's where I'll stop and do that later, because that's a separate portion.
Good.
Okay?
What I'd like to do now is to call members of the public who may wish to speak to the proposed project. I think you have a fairly good idea between the letters they've sent out and the presentation, what they would like to do. And then I know David has a very large stack of letters.
When I pass these out for the board to read, these are letters I've received in the last couple of days.
Right, and how many letters have you received?
I didn't count.
You didn't count,
A fairly significant number.
fine. And so.
One for each of us?
Yes, there's one, they're all stapled
Okay, so
together.
We
Okay,
can then
thank you.
consider those letters entered into the record.
Do you have one?
Yes, I have my own copy.
So, who would like to speak? Please give us your name as you stand up and speak. You're saying, huh?
You have one.
Have one.
Yeah.
Where?
Standing up.
Go ahead, Rich.
Richard Bradley, I live on,
Yes, she was.
Okay,
Go ahead.
sorry.
I just wanted to, in the interest of transparency, to say that my name's Jenny Littlewood, and I am a co-owner of the Pinnacle project. I just wanted people to know who I was. Thank you.
Great.
Richard Bradley, I live in Culver Hill Lane. I'm vehemently opposed to this project. It's too many units on too narrow a winding corner of a road. It wasn't very popular at 20 units. At 36, it's even worse. The numbers you portray up there, adults 59, 12 to 13 students, at 36 units, it could be couples. Could be 72, that they have their mother-in-law living there and their kids. That's an awful lot of people impacting that area, going across the street to the beach, going across Route 10, has a very negative impact. I have witnessed 2 near accidents there, including one with a truck almost jackknife, because someone stops quickly for someone crossing the road. When this land was purchased, it was purchased under certain rules, and they should comply with the rules of this town. Every bit of this project is a variance for this, variance for that. I think I'm all for developing the land as it was portrayed, but to go ahead and try to make all these changes to the rules, I don't think it's fair to even ask the town to do this, and I don't think it's a fair use of the town's time to even consider this. I just think overall it's having a negative impact. If you want to develop your 4 or 5 lots, go ahead and do it, but the town doesn't want you to have all these units. And as far as the impact on the town, what do we sell, about 7 houses a year in Lyme? You put 38 houses on the market to replace them, you're gonna have a real estate debacle. The values will go way down. It is gonna impact the town, no matter what you say. But you're gonna have that large lodge with all the people visiting there and the cabins, and all these houses behind it. Well, what's gonna be the, can they rent these things out? What's the cost of these units? Have you priced them out?
Do you want us to address that now, or just taking comments?
Actually, Rich, why don't we wait on that?
Okay, fine. But, you know, it just seems a bit greedy. And that's my overall impression of this whole thing. It was portrayed as the Pinnacle project, but I think was totally disingenuous, that it was some sort of thing for the public good. As people talk about aging in place, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking 4-bedroom units to come in. Those are for families. And I would even question the viability of co-housing. I mean, how can you get a bunch of people, strangers who want to live with each other? How can you sell the thing? This will probably end up as some religious sect somewhere down the road, because I don't think it's going to work. That's my 2 bits.
Somebody else like to comment? David?
David Roby, 7 Bliss Lane. Bill made a very nice presentation. Terrific, a terrific project. And all of you have. This is a wonderful thing. Rich, I think you're wrong. This is going to be beautiful. There's one problem with it. It doesn't work under our zoning ordinance. And what we really need is not extraordinary variances to shoehorn this project into the town. We need to have, by the zoning board, we need to have the town take a reasoned vote on an amendment that will permit it, or not. This is a decision for the townspeople, not for the zoning board. One sort of an aside, and that is that the variances that Pinnacle Project is asking for are the same variances that a garden variety developer will ask for a 36-unit multifamily project up and down Route 10. If that's what the town wants, let the town vote it in.
Thank you. Other comments? Simon?
As the last elected official who voted for this project some years ago, I actually believe that we need to be looking at this sort of thing very much more than we have been doing. To say we can't do it, it's going to overwhelm the town, is a load of crap. That's my...
Simon,
I'm not getting into an argument with you,
Sorry.
David.
I'll
Mr.
address-
Chairman,
I'll address-
I
Simon
object
has
to
the
this.
floor.
I'll address the board.
But wait a second, Simon needs to finish his
I'm
comment.
sorry, I thought you had finished, Simon.
Well, I think it is time that we seriously looked at how we handle co-housing and such things. You know, we have an objection to trying to do it. We are very keen on having very large, and I speak as somebody who actually has a large house. We have a a community that is very keen on having very large houses and will not actually consider letting other people come in. It's very much a case of pull up the drawbridge, we've got ours, stop anybody else doing it. And I really commend the Pinnacle project for doing this.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ellen Thompson at 52 Pico Road. I'm also the parish nurse here, and I'm the chair of the Aging in Place Committee that's been working here for a few years. And I'm very much in support of this kind of a project that allows people who are currently living in large homes to stay in town. Because right now, there's a number of people who would like to stay in town, but as they get older, they really can't afford to stay in the home that they've been living in or raise their family in. And they're looking for a more affordable option. I feel like this project really allows that to happen. So I would encourage us to think outside the box and think in a different way about the fact that the population in the country and in our state in particular is aging and requires a little more amenities that co-housing can really help us to afford. When people are living alone and we're scattered around the entire town, and it's very difficult to provide services. It's very difficult to stay home alone. And with this kind of a project, you have the ability to live together and support each other in close proximity. And that makes a big difference for a lot of people. It also makes it a lot more affordable. Thank you.
David, did you have another comment? Then I'd like to
Yeah.
make sure that other people get a chance.
What I wanted to say is a bit of a repetition of what I already said, and that is that this is a decision for the town. And 2 years ago, the Pinnacle project brought an amendment to the town after an extended effort on the part of the planning board working with Pinnacle project representatives to craft an amendment that would give them what they wanted and protect the town. And at the last minute, they pulled away from that effort and presented a proposal that the planning board could not support, and the planning board recommended against it. But again, it's our town. Aging in place, smaller units. I think it's something that we all want. But let's do it as a town through an amendment to the zoning ordinance, not a variance that does what Pinnacle project wants, but also has the prospect of doing a lot of damage to the town. There's a better way.
Other comments? I saw another hand in the back. Jane?
Yes, I'm Jane Pant. I think that this project, I think that Lyme needs these housing options. And I'm not sure I know the best way to go about it, but I mean, I could afford to stay in my home. I live in East Jesus, basically. But I probably won't be able to stay living there. And so I think we need to look at these kind of options, and I think this is a very good option. I have a little concern about a variance that would waive the 5 years. If you build a large building and then don't keep it for 5 years, that someone else could come in and do the same thing and build something, put in undesirable apartments, whereas these are very desirable and very scenic, and I think the impact would be quite small where it is. Post Pond is where Lyme Lodge is with many, many cabins, I don't know, 20 plus cabins. The house by the lake used to be a hotel. there's always been a lot of activity there and development and fairly high density. And I think it's a good thing there. I think it's a good place for it. And I'm not sure I know the best way to go about it. I understand what David is saying, maybe the town should vote on it. I'm not sure. But I think we need these kind of housing options.
Thank you. Other comments? I'd like to get more, but if nobody else has anything, Richard, go ahead.
Why, if aging in place is the concern, why was this not an over 55, no children type complex? That might be more acceptable to the town than, when you start talking 4-bedroom units, you're talking kids and families.
There's only 3 4-bedroom
Two.
units. 2 4-bedroom units.
How many 3 bedrooms?
I don't have that number, about a dozen.
Okay, if we have no further comment from the public, at this point, I would like to ask members of the board to start with questions that they may have. Then we'll see where we get to in the little less than half an hour remaining before I think it's appropriate to continue the hearing.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, I think I'd like to hear the rest of the application, particularly since this is a variance request.
Yes. Thank you.
I'd like to hear the.
Thank you very much for bringing that up, Mr. Vice Chairman.
That's why he's the vice chairman.
That's right, but it's 9 o'clock at night, and brains
It's
begin
gonna
to slow
take
down.
a little bit of time.
Yes.
If you don't object, I'll go to the variance first, even though your application starts with the special exceptions.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Your variance application, is it in the materials that you handed out earlier?
Not in the notebook, no.
So,
It's what we have.
It's what we were mailed.
It
it's
was
what we were mailed,
mailed,
okay.
Yes, absolutely. And it started with a cover letter from Brian Consulting, the CLD engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if you go back, which gives an overview of the project. Then if you go back, the application form, yeah. You see lot line lodging, the owner, et cetera. And then it starts with the special exceptions, which have to do with, and I'll just tell you, the special exception permission for some development on agricultural soils, some alteration within the wetlands buffer, and some lot coverage variations, which I think Brian touched on. The lot coverage limits are 26,000 square feet per lot. So if you had the 5 lots in a conventional development, each lot would get the 26,000 square foot limit, house, barn, outbuildings, whatever. By clustering all on one lot, you go from 5 lots to 1, and yet that 26,000 square foot limit is still there per lot. So once you cluster, now you're under a more restrictive lot coverage number. So this project is at 58,000 square feet, which is much less than 5 times 26, but it's more than the 26. So that's one of the special exceptions. The alteration, I'll just do these now. The alteration within the wetlands buffer, there are certain intrusions we need to make, not into the wetlands, but into the buffer, to provide for access drives, some side slope construction. The utility force mains are going to go through and of course then be covered over, and the water services and well location may need some work in the wetlands buffer. Development on agricultural soils, once you remove the steep slopes and the wetland buffers, what's left are agricultural soils, the uplands, and so we need a little relief from those restrictions to allow some construction on agricultural soils. which allows us to preserve the balance of the property. And also there will be agricultural uses in and around this community, gardens, etc. But we need to intrude and need a special exception there. And then the building height issue that was touched on, because the buildings are sort of constructed along the land to follow the slope of the land, front face sides may be higher than the 35-foot limit, while back ends will be lower. So we'd be working on an average height, and we may need a little relief, special exception relief for that with fire department input. And I have written in my materials that we believe each of those meet the 14 points. And the proposal in general meets the 14 points to allow a special exception to be granted on those. And I can do those in more detail if you want later. The variance, and as Brian indicated, there are sort of two routes to get there. It's one variance for a 36-unit co-housing multifamily development in the rural zone, which is not permitted. You've got planned developments in other zones, not in the rural zone. You've got this interesting conversion piece of the ordinance that is allowed anywhere, but we've got to wait 5 years, and again, resulting in a clunky development. And you've got some increased density for affordable housing, but we're not doing all affordable housing, so we just sort of don't fit.
Excuse me, do you mean affordable or workforce?
Workforce.
Workforce.
Right.
Affordable is actually a different animal.
Right, well, you have, I'm sort of playing off both. There's workforce under the state statute. You also have an affordable housing piece to your ordinance.
To our zoning.
Yeah, that allows to your zoning ordinance, that allows the sort of half acre up to 4 units on a 2-acre parcel. And so that could be done here if we met all the, which that's what that one sample subdivision showed, 10 lots with effectively 2 acres, which would have the 4 units allowed. But that would be all affordable.
Right.
Under your ordinance. Right, which is not what we're doing, but again, it reflects a density that is, could be done. So what we're looking at is a variance from the table 4.1 to permit this development in the rural district. And where I've written in the application, alternatively, the variance is requested from section 4.46, imposing a wait period of 5 years before converting each of 6 buildings, if allowed by site plan review in a lot size average subdivision, into 6 residential units per building. And then a variance from 4.46G to permit us to reconfigure those 6 unit buildings into a development that works, rather than having 6 6-unit buildings sort of spaced around, not connected. We need relief to permit their reconfiguration into 2 buildings with more than 6 units and several buildings with less than 6 units. So there are, as Brian said, sort of 2 ways to get there. I think it is essentially rolled into one variance that allows this development as proposed. If allowed as proposed, we believe it will not diminish the surrounding property values. The proposed use, I think as some of the testimony was, consists of 36 units in an area where it fits with what's already there. You have the lodge use that's historically been there. Route 10, it's a major road. You aren't out in the middle of nowhere with these units. In a more rural setting, you're actually on a well-exposed, well-traveled road. So, and the realtor input that we have shows that this kind of development in this kind of setting would not diminish surrounding property areas, property values. So we believe that we have sufficient evidence that market impacts of planned communities such as this, with lots of open space, sensitive, low-impact development, is not going to depreciate surrounding properties. Granting this variance will not be contrary to the public interest, and I think you've heard a lot of testimony that there in fact is public good promoted by this development. And to answer one of the questions, it's not simply for aging in place, but it does provide that benefit. It's also for affordable housing for younger people starting out, workforce housing, single people who need a place to live in order to take a job in this area, and available space for young families or families, empty nesting families who want to be in Lyme, but there isn't a lot of turnover in property and there isn't a lot of availability. So there's public good in terms of housing benefits that's provided. There's public good in terms of land conservation that is provided by this clustering, low-profile, sustainable, diverse residential use. It follows the master plan, which is sort of representative of Lyme's own goals in the public interest. And so where this provides for elements indicated in the master plan, we think it promotes public interest and is not contrary to it. And here we keep sort of feeding on these concepts, but in my work as a land use attorney, you don't always find symmetry with the ordinance you're trying to work with. I mean, we all know zoning ordinances can't take into account every unique piece of property in town. It's impossible. Zoning ordinances can't always keep pace with the times because of the way they're developed. It's a long process. Start with a master plan, develop an ordinance, goes to town meeting. Every year you may tweak a piece of it, but it can't possibly keep pace with sort of modern life. It's always lagging a step behind. And so when you find an ordinance that is very forward-looking, as Lyme's is, and has flexibility built into it, but still it's not perfect and it can't always reflect the reality of one owner's piece of property who wants to do something. And that's the test. I did a law lecture series with a municipal attorney last fall, and he would mention to the planning boards and zoning boards we were speaking to, it's not a reason to deny a variance because it doesn't comply with the ordinance. That's why people are before you, because it doesn't comply with the ordinance, so we're here for relief. But this project, to me, is interesting because it more closely tracks this ordinance than a lot of projects that I've worked with. Because of the various things we've touched on, you allow clustering, which is great. You allow some increased density, which is great. You allow conversion to get more units, which is great. And so I think we're just seeking to do something that fits within the spirit and intent of the ordinance, is true to it, but is practical and lets something be built. Applying lot size averaging provisions encourages the clustered development, avoids the widespread disturbance of the land, which is throughout in your master plan, the backup data to your master plan, and the zoning ordinance. Large lots, and I also have some studies on this. They aren't that friendly to the land because you have lots of road infrastructure. To put a road in, to get those 5 lots in here would be an awful lot of site work, blasting, and it would be quite the scar to that nice slope that is, the Pinnacle property. So this allows a efficient use of the land, and also something that is doable and maintains the slopes and the vistas that you're trying to maintain. And your ordinance also allows planned developments in nearby districts. We're only a mile away from downtown, from Lyme Common. And so The fact that planned developments are allowed close by is another way that this development is consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Not quite in this district, but close enough to be true to the goals of the ordinance. We think granting the variance will do substantial justice, because this is a unique property in a unique setting. It's next to the lodge already, across from the pond. It's in a place that frankly, 5 big houses doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so you have owners who have nearly 100 acres. And once you add all those overlays and remove the restricted land, you're down to effectively 20-acre lots, 5 houses. Those 5 houses could be pretty intense with additional dwelling units, barns, and outbuildings. This is actually less intense, but allows the owners to make a reasonable use of their property. And that's the way, obviously, zoning review has evolved in the past decade or so. It's not, you can't do anything else with this. I mean, it used to be if you had any other use, I could put a barn on it and sell flowers, oh, and you're out of here. Now what the courts look at is it a reasonable use in context on the property? Certainly this development on nearly 100 acres is a reasonable use and has less impact than a conventional development, and less fiscal impact too. Denial of the variance would result in an unnecessary hardship to the owner. The zoning restrictions, in light of what's allowed elsewhere, these zoning restrictions as applied to the property interfere with their reasonable use. This co-housing proposal, multi-family proposal of 36 units, is a reasonable use on 100 acres given what's allowed in other circumstances. The property is unique in its size, it's unique in its setting along Route 10, between Post Pond and a ridge line. Clustering them in a less visible area provides privacy, preserves aesthetics, while allowing an economically viable development. The 36 units lets a use be made in a way that is economically viable. Again, the big houses, people aren't buying the big houses, and they aren't sustaining the big houses long term. No fair, and the second part of that 5th test, no fair and substantial relationship exists between the general purposes of the zoning ordinance and the restriction on this property. And this again is where the courts look at, what's the reason for the restriction? Is it actually carrying through on this property? If the reason for the restriction is to preserve steep slopes and the vistas and the wetlands and the agricultural soils, and also provide a use for the property, if the reasons are that, and yet you can get to the density through the conversion, what's the reason for the 5-year wait? I don't know. If you're waiting 5 years here and here's a property with no structure on it, why build and wait 5 years? The courts start to look at a nexus between the purpose of the ordinance and its impact on the property. And so where there's no relationship, where you can't draw the nexus, then the ordinance should be inapplicable or needs to be varied as applied to this property. Otherwise, it's unconstitutional. At the end of the day, that's what the court's looking at. And then I get on my soapbox just for a minute. Zoning's only 100 years old, and it was a way for governments, municipalities to take the private nuisance and covenant way of governing land use and try to impose some structure. But it was preventative, to prevent harm. It wasn't sort of a management overlay to micromanage everyone's property. So the reason zoning boards exist is to provide that safety valve. If the ordinance gets too tight, then it becomes an unconstitutional restriction on the property. And here, 100 acres, 5 lots, that's a little too tight for this unique property. So, where the nexus is gone, planned unit developments are allowed next door but not here. Why, where this development preserves all those goals that the zoning ordinance tries to protect, then if that nexus is gone, then there is an unreasonable restriction. The variance, third point, the variance would not injure the public or private rights of others. There is nothing in this proposal that's going to cause injury. It may not follow, I mean, there may be a disagreement in terms of how do you get there. And maybe it should be a vote of the town to rezone. That was tried here. And for a number of reasons, I mean, I think the vote broke down maybe a third in terms of how people looked at the proposal. There were reasons why there was a retraction of certain portions of the ordinance. I guess my point is a variance, again, applies to this unique property. No one's asking this time to change the ordinance. The ordinance is there in this zone, you know, sort of one size fits all, but in this circumstances, it doesn't fit this property. And so this proposal doesn't injure the public or private rights of others because it is consistent with the goals of the ordinance as stated in the various provisions. So we think we meet the 5 criteria. We think it's a reasonable proposal. And we think we meet the 14 points of the special exception. Okay?
I would suggest we set a date and time for continuation of this hearing.
I would agree with you.
Can I ask, I have 4 or 5 questions that I would like to pose because I think they require a whole bunch of information gathering.
Wonderful.
It would be nice to have the questions, give them the time to dig.
Yes, I would agree.
Thank you very much.
And maybe that'll help. All right, so I had 4 or 5 things I spotted that I would like clarification on. There are a bunch of calculations that you folks made that led to your estimates of the 5-lot division and thereby went to the lot size averaging. And one of the issues, or at least one of the districts that you considered in there is the steep slopes district. And it's shown as this orange section on the map. And our ordinance says 20% grade is steep slopes. And the contours shown on your map are 10%. So why is all of that steep slopes? That's question 1, and I don't want an answer now, next time. But I'd like clarification on why those areas aren't consistent with the ordinance.
I think those are 10-foot contours in the back.
Well, the ones that I looked at that were labeled are 5, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're gonna
Verify.
find out for us. Okay, so the second thing is, part of the issue that we're gonna deal with has to do with ag soils. And it's ag soils in this area, but in the agricultural soils section of the ordinance, we have to treat ag soils decisions about whether to grant the right to build on it and how much you can build on it, where you can build on it, based on a parent lot, because it's recently subdivided. We have no information on the parent lot, so can you bring enough detail about the parent lot?
Sure.
And when you do that, I'd like to see, it would help us, I think, to understand the total ag soils on the property. The listing in your table was ag soils in excess of the wetlands, not total ag soils. So can you clarify which areas where the ag soil and the wetlands overlay occurs, so we can get some sense of the total amount of space?
Sure. You're talking about the wet buffers and the ag soils, where those overlap, right?
Well, I'd like to know, I'd like to see something clearly showing all of the ag soils areas, all of the wetland buffers. The wetland buffers seem to be pretty nicely delineated, but I can't tell where the ag soils end. There's a tiny bit here, and in your calculation, you exclude the acreage that may be in ag soils
Yeah. because
from the total.
Because the wet buffer was more restrictive,
Right,
so I was taking the more restrictive.
right, but I'd like to see where the ag soils are and get those totals.
I think if you go to the third page.
Well, you can clarify. I looked, and I couldn't figure it out, so make it easier for us.
When you look at the ag soil section of the ordinance, it does not exclude the wetlands buffers when you're trying to calculate how much of the ag soils you can
Yes.
look at. So
Okay.
trying to, not knowing the total amount of ag soils makes it impossible to calculate how much you could.
So if I give a map that
Mhm.
just shows the ag soils with like the lines for the wetland buffers, but not the hatching, not the shading or anything.
Right, and
Just
then
so-
show the
just something so I can
total
see
area
ag
of
soils.
the ag soils.
Then I can see wetland buffer, then I can see this and that, and that should be for the parent lot as well. 'cause-
So Walter, do you want area data with that too?
Pardon?
Area data, in other words, we want to know.
Well, the numbers, yeah.
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 Now, is that for the lot size averaging for the?
It's just for the total, no, the
Just for the
total,
Yeah.
The total
That's a
lots, okay.
special
Total lot.
exception.
Total picture for the lot.
Sure.
total lot.
Yeah.
Perfect, yep.
And there were two issues that came up that I'm unacquainted with. I mean, I know that there are issues, but I don't know the details, and I'd like to have whoever can provide them, it would be very helpful to us. First is this criteria for the 5-year wait on multi-dwelling conversions.
Yeah.
It would be nice to go back into the history of the zoning ordinance and find out what reasoning was presented or discussed by either the planning board or a town meeting when that provision was added, because there's very little guidance in the ordinance as it's written as to what produced that particular number or what the intent was.
What's the intent is,
Yeah, I can guess at the intent, but I'd rather
Yeah.
not. And then similarly, in the discussion of the withdrawal of the amendment to the zoning ordinance a couple of years ago, I remember that there was an amendment that had been under negotiation between planning board and the Pinnacle project. And I vaguely have this recollection that it didn't come out the way I'd like somebody to stand up and discuss both sides of that issue if it's possible.
Absolutely.
There were some minor things about, I couldn't get some of the calculations that were presented to agree, but I can ask that next time. They're probably just a typo or something. That was in one of the tables about areas.
Areas, we'll check it.
Other questions that you'd like to have them address for the next meeting?
Dimensions on
I have a couple more.
Ron?
Oh, I forgot. Sorry, go ahead.
And has the entity done a market study or got some sort of notion as to how to support their projections as to how these will be committed to or supported? And that, not now, but
Right,
next
in the
time.
process, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Secondly, what's the relationship between the applicant here, which is an LLC, and the future owners? Will they be members of this LLC, or is there some kind of structural issue we should know about?
Thank you, Ron.
We can do that.
And the third, are there any cases that you can tell us about in which a variance has been granted in this situation of undeveloped property? With co-housing,
With co-housing,
or similar type housing?
I'll look for it.
Okay.
It might also be very useful to have a better understanding of some of the internal mechanisms associated with co-housing. In other words, will each one-bedroom apartment, for example, would it be completely self-sufficient in terms of the Pullman kitchen and that sort of thing? Or particularly in the larger units where they would be connected together, I think we'd probably like to know more about the planned interaction between the common house and those units.
Yeah, frankly, I think that'd be helpful, because there are, for example, elevator, access issues for people
There-
with less mobility, so we have that.
Exactly
yeah.
so, and whether in fact the structure, and more about the structure, the bridges, because
Yeah.
they are structural entities. And,
Do impact.
and they impact the way we deal with this.
Absolutely.
And other thoughts? Walter?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I forgot one or two. The sheets we got, this one I'm looking at, there are no dimensions on it showing where the buildings are with reference to any established pins or boundaries. I mean, I suppose I could scale it if I had a reduced scale, but it would be nice to have these locations, the locations of the buildings defined in reference to the
Side boundary lines.
side boundary lines, road setbacks, something that shows us where these places are going to be.
That would include, I think, a calculation on the actual segment by segment road length, because I did some rough scaling on that, and I'd like to see it done.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
The driveway
Basically,
road
I
access.
scaled the
Yeah.
driveway at over 1,000 feet.
It's about 408, 430
Well, it
feet.
depends on where you start the scaling.
Okay. And those 11 by 17s are reduced, so.
We have the big ones.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
Okay.
proportional divider, we can take care of that problem.
Okay.
But
So I mean, it
I
might
would-
say that
I'd
that's.
like to know more about that whole set of dimensions.
Sure.
That's a perfectly, it has an effect on design. It's something we have to know about.
Okay.
Yes.
And one other trivial question, because I don't want to keep this very much longer. You have a very large septic system there. It's got a fairly big pumping station. And do you plan to have standby generators? That-
Yes, actually.
Because that has
Having
direct
lived
bearing
in a
on.
place that had one.
That didn't work.
Yeah, that has direct bearing on a lot of things.
Yeah, like Flushing.
Yes.
Like Flushing, but also if you have people who are aging in place.
Yeah.
You have some, you actually, from a fire code standpoint, a building code standpoint, get into some critical and actually fairly tricky questions about the nature of the generator and how it works.
Yeah.
Other questions? If not,
I have one,
certainly not.
and that is the relationship between the proposed leach field for this project and the leach field that serves the
which
structures
is over in
on
here
the,
somewhere.
on the original lot 22. This is 22.1, I'm assuming the other one is lot 22, knowing how they split these things up.
It's about over here somewhere.
I thought it was about there.
Okay.
It's way, it is on, it was on the slide.
It's-
Yeah, I
You
saw
got
it
it,
on the
so-
slide, but I'd
Yeah.
like to see it
Yeah,
on
if you
some
could drop it onto a
drawing.
plan, that would be
Scale it
good.
down or something.
Yeah,
That's all part of our need to know about the current lot.
yeah.
No, so I would like to propose, our normal meeting is the third Thursday of every month. And if it's amenable to you all, I would like to continue the meeting till then. One of the reasons for this is that the Conservation Commission has indicated that they can't complete their work until they can see the site better. And my colleagues have not spoken to that question, but it's not inconceivable we might reach the same conclusion. And so that gives us time, you all time to assemble your materials. And if that's amenable to all of you,
I
I'd like
would
to.
welcome it, because I have a charitable function that night. I won't be able to attend that function, so it would be great. I'd rather
Oh,
be
you'd rather
here.
miss that.
I'd rather be here.
Ah, okay, that solves that.
Certainly, Councilor.
We certainly oblige you.
Thank you.
Great, okay, I would move we adjourn
Until-
until, David, the date of the next meeting?
The 19th?
19th of March?
7:30.
Walter?
Before the motion carries, I wanted to make a clarification on one of the requests I had. I know that I asked the applicant for their input or recollection on the change in the amendment or the process of negotiating with the planning board. Who can we work about, I forget who, was it David alluded to that a couple of years ago, planning board and Pinnacle Project had been working together to try and craft an amendment. And at the last minute, or at some point, that negotiation or whatever fell apart, and instead another amendment was proposed, or?
I can give you my memory of the history. Do you want it?
Excuse me, John.
Sure.
Just something that
You want
we
me to
can-
write it out, or?
Yes, normal projects require access from the road, frontage of the lot that we're in consideration.
Yes.
The you might want to address that particular issue as to why you're bringing it in, where you are.
It is.
Yeah.
We'll call the state, have them.
There you go.
The state that wouldn't give you a pedestrian crossing.
Yeah, that one.
Like that Snappy Little Eye rule there.
District Two, Alan Hanscom?
You did.
Okay, so Walter, did you have?
I'm good.
Okay.
I usually do.
Vote on the motion.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
You made it, I'll second it.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
See you next month.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.